I can only assume that you're watching this now because you either support the idea that all life should be protected, or someone who does has asked you to listen to what I'm about to say. Or maybe you're not quite sure how you feel about the relationship between a mother and the child that grows in her body. And you're hoping that what I will say might help you somehow ascertain what's most sensible here. Well, I don't think that I can assume that any argument that I have should make or break what anyone should think about a woman's right to terminate a child that's growing in her body. Regardless of why you have found yourself here, I am going to tell you what Vision 2020 Cook County is, why we exist, and what you can do to help our mission of transforming our county and our nation into cultures of life. In 2016, Chicago's Cook County had 21,747 abortions, which account for more than half of those in the state of Illinois. These abortions contribute to the 2,700 per day in our nation, which amounts to roughly 1 million per year. In less than 3 years, one would have exterminated the entire population of Chicago at this rate. Regardless of how you feel about your freedom, if we as Americans are taking innocent lives through abortion, then we as Americans have reached the zenith of hypocrisy. This would mean that the nation which provided its citizens the greatest freedoms in human history also perpetrated the greatest genocide in human history. One of these two premises must be correct. We have all heard people state that history tends to repeat itself, and the great American writer Mark Twain told us that history often rhymes. Whether history repeats itself or rhymes, history has proven that we simply cannot determine what is right from what any predominant culture deems right at any given time. Again, history has proven that we simply cannot determine what is right from what any predominant culture deems right at any given time. Nearly every known crime against humanity today was accepted by a predominant culture or cultures and only corrected after a select few chose to rise against the prevailing tide in order to steer the populace back to a higher moral state. And while we can go as far back in history as the earliest recorded civilizations to demonstrate this, we need not do so at all. Did you know that the largest murder spree of the 20th century grew out of a system of government that has been welcomed and developed in several nations and is still accepted and maintained in many nations today? I am fairly certain that nobody watching this has any desire to live in North Korea. Communism is not something that only exists in an isolated nation far away that nobody has heard of. China is one of the most formidable nations existing today and is a communist nation. The greatest murder spree in history arguably occurred under the dictatorship of Joseph Stalin, which followed the Bolshevik Revolution in the former Soviet Union, the birthplace of communism. Most agree that more than 20 million people were either sentenced to death or killed by famine as a result of early Soviet communism, a form of government which, as one writer put it, is contemptuous of human nature. We have seen much the same in Venezuela in recent years. Hugo Chavez was celebrated not only by his own people, but by several Americans that I think that you are familiar with, namely MIT professor Noam Chomsky, civil rights activist Jesse Jackson, and actor Sean Penn, to name a few. Yet the very things these respected people celebrated drove Venezuela into a present state of anarchist chaos. Did you know that most of Adolf Hitler's evil plan was published in a book long before his rise to power was stifled by the Allied forces? Mein Kampf was published in 1924, and yet Adolf Hitler continued to rise in power and nearly conquered all of Europe. It wasn't until 1940 that the Allies finally determined that Nazism needed to be crushed. His book was a manifesto for all of the terrible evil that he would propagate, and yet was a bestseller in Germany for some time. What about something that hits closer to home for Americans? I suspect that most people listening to this now would agree that nobody should be denied their basic human freedoms based on ethnic origin. Yet, as of 1970, this was not widely believed in our nation. Black Americans were not allowed to sit anywhere they chose on a city bus or attend certain schools. These acts were permitted in our nation and prompted boycotts, lawsuits, and violence. I am not intending to compare the magnitude of these events with the state of abortion in the United States. I'm only demonstrating that history has proven to us that both the laws which exist and the culture in which they reside cannot be of any assurance that what seems to be considered morally acceptable actually is, and will continue to be in the near future. This point alone should lead any person to carefully examine the terminating of lives prior to live birth. This point should also explain why there is a growing wave of citizens whom are volunteering to fight against the legal right to perform an abortion procedure, many of which have been fighting since 1973. This wave has reached the city of Chicago and its surrounding Cook County area, which accounts for more than half of the abortions in Illinois and is one of the most pro-abortion areas in our entire country. If Cook County changes, then some in our state are convinced. So will our nation eventually. Vision 2020 Cook County is nothing more than the few citizens that are choosing to rise against the prevailing tide, which has turned its back on those that cannot speak. By speaking out, educating, engaging our faith leaders in prayer, we are choosing not to turn our backs on the unborn and are determined to transform our area and this great nation by hook or crook. If the legalization of abortion is yet another instance in which certain cultures, such as our own here in the United States, has gone wrong, then I think it will be important to consider how far off course we've wandered. Roughly 60 million abortions have occurred legally in the United States since 1973, nearly 2,700 per day. Some are now stating that this right should be granted even moments before normal labor, which is well after the term in which several children have been born, including my own child born several weeks early. My home state of Illinois has just recently legislated that our tax dollars can now be used to subsidize abortions for state employees, with the passage of the HB 40 bill, which some estimate will generate 12,000 additional abortions per year. If you're already on the side of life, then I would urge you to closely examine if you are doing enough. Do you go to a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or a temple? Is your pastor, rabbi, imam, or spiritual leader speaking about life? Have you been voting for candidates that promote or support life from womb to tomb? Are you subsidizing abortion by spending your hard-earned wages at businesses that donate heavily to promote abortions when adequate substitutes exist? Or when these businesses are providing you a luxury as opposed to a true necessity? Did you know that there are nearly 40 companies that contributed more than $1 billion to Planned Parenthood in 2016? Many of these sell us products that we don't need or that there are suitable replacements for. Are you looking for a way to support the culture of life but not sure how? I'm going to give you 3 easy ways right now. Stop buying Starbucks coffee, stop buying overly expensive products at Bath & Body Works, and change cellular providers if Verizon is your cell phone provider. By continuing to spend your hard-earned wages at these stores, you are complicit in abortion and complicit in the act of murdering an innocent child. No, this is not an exaggeration. You are contributing to the earnings of the largest abortion provider in the United States, Planned Parenthood. You can choose to change, and now that you have been informed, you don't have a choice if you care about the lives of children. Still not convinced that abortion is yet another shortcoming of civilization? Have you considered the testimonies of those with the most experience? What about embryologists? Did you know that by definition, nearly the entire world of embryology considers it an unarguable fact that human life begins at the moment of conception? I won't take your time with quotes. If you don't know a whole lot about this, then simply Google "when life begins according to science." You'll find all the answers you need there. What about abortionists that have turned pro-life? Did you know that several of the abortionists since 1973 have become pro-life advocates, some of them being the largest known abortionists in history? Here's one that you can search for, and you will find many more. Research the story of Bernard Nathanson, who oversaw nearly 75,000 abortions and subsequently went on to make a movie entitled The Silent Scream, and author several pro-life books, which include Aborting America and The Hand of God. What about Roe v. Wade? We've all heard of that. And did you know that the infamous Roe v. Wade case, which legalized abortion, was not generated by a woman seeking an abortion, but rather a pro-abortion attorney named Sarah Weddington, that used a case for a woman seeking nothing more than a divorce to overturn the laws in Texas, which made most abortions illegal? Don't take my word for it. Research Norma Jane Roe McCorvey on your own. Here's a recent quote from Ms. McCorvey. "I think it is safe to say that the entire abortion industry is a lie. I am dedicated to spending the rest of my life undoing the law that bears my name." If you find that these testimonies are still not sufficient for making a determination, then there's one last thing that I suggest you do. I suspect that most people listening to this now know at least one person who has had an abortion. If you haven't asked them how they feel about their abortion, then ask. I know what you're thinking. What kind of person would suggest asking a post-abortive woman how the abortion experience felt? Are you thinking what I'm thinking? If we're not terminating lives, then why do we grieve as though life has ended? Have we perhaps let the cat out of the bag? Thank you for watching, urging you to respect life if for no other reason, because someone respected yours.